Hello, welcome to Motivation at Work. I'm Dr. Linda Herkenhoff, and I'm going to be your guide today as we go through this webinar together. I would like to start by thanking Beekeeper for inviting me to be part of their continuing education initiative. I myself am currently involved in the educational world as a full professor at St. Mary's College in Moraga, California. I teach leadership, organizational behavior, quantitative analysis, and analytics. I'm also director of our Global Executive MBA program, and I'm the past executive director of human resources for Stanford University, along with some ongoing consulting roles. I share some of my experience with you because it has helped me to realize that becoming a great manager doesn't happen overnight. Leading teams is an art form that's continually refined through years of experience and continuing education. In this series of webinars, we will introduce you to best practices that you can use to more effectively connect with, inspire, and motivate your own teams. Before we start, let me take a minute to introduce Beekeeper. Beekeeper is a thought leader in the internal communication and human resources space. As many of you may already know, they've built an award-winning communication and operational platform designed to connect non-desk workers with the rest of the organization. Beekeeper connects colleagues across locations and departments in real time via mobile or desktop devices and includes an intelligent dashboard to help companies improve internal communication and streamline business processes. So now that you know all the players, let's get started with our webinar today. We'll start out by looking at why we even worry about motivation. Let's define motivation so we're all on the same page. I'll introduce 3 groups of theories, and then I'll give you some details and examples of each one of those, and then we'll talk for a few minutes about the global reach. So why motivation? Well, here's a not totally exhaustive list, but some of the big hitters. And let me start out by saying motivation is a focus for all of us as managers because it helps with improvement. We know from research that it improves initiative, creativity, level of efficiency, goal achievement, workforce stability, and learning. In other words, overall performance in the workplace. And that's very important to success in all of our organizations. But what do we mean by motivation? Let's make sure we're all talking about motivation in the same sense because there's lots of different definitions for it. It's really just the process of initiating but also sustaining goal-directed behavior. Basically, we can think of motivation as accomplishing work through the efforts of others. And if you can't do this well, you will never be a good manager. Motivation really accounts for individuals' intensity, direction, and persistence of effort towards obtaining a goal. In this whole world of motivation, we can break it down into 3 groups. And those 3 groups include process theories. These emphasize the nature of the interaction between the individual and the environment. And the internal theories that suggest variables within the person give rise to motivation and behavior. And lastly, external. These focus on environmental factors to help explain behaviors. But what we're going to find as we go through these theories that they're combined in a variety of ways through several key ideas. So let's have a little bit more detailed look at some examples. And we'll start out with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Maslow was around from 1908 to 1970, And he did this seminal piece of research in the late 1960s. Interestingly enough, he was diagnosed as mentally unstable in childhood, and yet in his career he gave us one of the most important motivation theories that still is used a lot today. This is our first internal theory, and here's his hierarchy of needs. The very first one, at the bottom of the pyramid, the physiological need, he thought were things like dealing with making sure you had appropriate food, clothing, clean water, and clean air. And once you had those needs met, then you would be motivated by the next level in the pyramid. And the next level has to do with safety and security. In other words, have you got a job that gives you money to pay the bills and to allow you and your family to live in a safe environment? But after those needs are met, they're no longer motivational, and you move up the pyramid yet again. This time, you're in the love or the social level, where you're motivated by seeking out and interacting with other people and establishing relationships. The next level, the esteem level, is your desire to be respected and appreciated and really feel good about yourself. But once those needs are met, a very, very small part of the population rises to the top level. In fact, statistics currently in research suggest less than 1% of the people will get up to SA, which is self-actualization, the final level of success, where you're doing everything you can, that kind of higher Zen state. And it's the peak often people think of their career. So this pyramid is interesting, but not just from the standpoint of looking at how we as managers deal with our employees, but the whole marketing world has been built around many of these particular needs. So let's take physiological for a second. Think about all of the different companies and industries that are involved with bottled water, organic food. How many pieces of clothing have you bought to make sure you're protected from the weather, from the elements? And then safety and security. The industries that have popped up trying to fulfill those needs are the alarms, security systems, so people are motivated to buy those products. And then, of course, when we get to love, there's no shortage of Match.com type sites out there, and people spend a lot of money to achieve those needs as well. In the esteem area, of course, we have the cosmetics industry. I'm sure you can think of lots of others. And self-actualization is really the workshop, self-help books, all of those things. So this particular theory is important enough that it's actually driven marketing industry in the United States and around the world. But some of Maslow's colleagues did not agree with the aspect that this was a linear relationship and that the linear relationship moved you up the pyramid continually. Of course, we now know people can be in various levels in the pyramid, depending on the context, depending on where they are in their careers, and it's actually not so fixed. It's not a linear process. It's something that is a little bit more flexible. So let's have a look at McGregor. He also was around in the 1960s, and he built on this Maslow pyramid concept, but he said, you know, I can actually simplify this whole thing. I can tell you right now as managers, you only have two groups of employees. You have the Theory X people and you have the Theory Y people. And the Theory X people really need a lot of direction. They don't really like work. They really probably don't want to be there. And they're mainly motivated by money. They certainly lack creativity. Whereas the Theory Y people, they direct themselves. They're very interested in work. They're very motivated by self-potential, and they happen to be highly creative. So some of you are probably thinking right now, What are we talking about with theory X and theory Y people? I only know theory Y people. Well, let me give you an example. Theory X people, who again, according to McGregor, based on his description, would really only be interested in these last two, the bottom two tiers of the Maslow pyramid. And so let's think about someone who bags groceries at a grocery store, a seasonal worker, a high school student who's just trying to make pocket money. They're not really going to be all that interested in attending a seminar on creative packing of grocery bags. They're really there for one reason and one reason only, and that's to get their paycheck and to take that money and then have some fun with it probably. So there are Theory X jobs, and there's nothing wrong with those Theory X jobs. We do, in fact, need them. But McGregor was the one who said we can actually put labels on these. And then, of course, as we get up to those top needs in the Maslow pyramid, that's where the Theory Y people would come in. So McGregor basically helped us to understand when to apply Maslow and how to apply Maslow. And he agreed with a lot of his colleagues that it was not a linear relationship. People could move around in those particular tiers. All right, let's go on to McClelland. This is still an internal theory, so this means people are being motivated from within their own needs. And he decided that there was still a need for power, achievement, and affiliation by everyone in the corporation or the organization. He pointed out that with power, the power could come from personal power, but it could also come from institutional power. So let me give you an example. Personal power might be if you're the principal of a high school, let's say an elementary school. Institutional power might be if you are working for the CIA or the FBI or the IRS. We certainly know they have power. And depending on how those are combined, people can have that need for power fulfilled by both personal and institutional. The achievement need was really that need for achievement, and I'm going to add in there recognition as well. And people need to know they're doing a good job. They need to know that those goals that they're accomplishing are actually being achieved in a successful manner. Affiliation means people want to be with other people in groups and relationships, why employee clubs pop up, why teams pop up, why professional organizations are popular. But some people would argue those three areas, power, achievement, and affiliation, are not enough, and there needs to also be one added, which is really the avoidance need. Being able to avoid any kind of pain or confrontation can be highly motivational. But McClelland didn't include that in his particular model. Herzberg's contribution to motivation, his theory is considered kind of a hybrid between internal and external, and you'll see why I say that in a minute. Once again, he was working on a lot of his contributions during the 60s, and he was around from 1923 and just passed away in 2000. His PhD was on a rather interesting topic, electric shock therapy. But he did decide to move away from that when he wrote his seminal piece in 1968. One more time, how do you motivate employees? And this was before the internet now, remember. And by 1987, there was already 1.2 million reprints, which was amazing. And I can tell you today, I still use this theory and his paper in my classroom. So still a very major contribution. So what exactly does this theory look like? It's referred to as the motivation hygiene theory. And the hygiene factors on the left-hand side are the factors, according to him, that would help you avoid job dissatisfaction in the workplace. And the factors on the right, what he called the motivation factors, were the factors that increased job satisfaction. So he saw job satisfaction as being pretty important. Let's look at the hygiene factors in a little bit more detail. Company policy and administration. So somewhere you've got to have that compiled, either on your website or, heaven forbid, you still have a hard copy of it somewhere floating around. But I can't think of an employee I have ever known who was motivated to go into the HR room or on the HR web and pick up the company policy. And they just got so motivated. No, that's not going to happen. But if you don't have that policy in administration all laid out, that manual or that set of guidelines, employees will be dissatisfied. They won't be motivated because you've got it, but they will be dissatisfied if you don't. Let me give you an example. Let's say I go in and ask for some sort of sabbatical leave, and I'm given 6 months, and the next person goes in and asks for a sabbatical leave, and they're only given 2 weeks. There's no policy around it. We're going to be dissatisfied as employees, but once the policy goes in, it doesn't increase our motivation level, and that's really what he was trying to get at. Supervision. Again, you need supervision for people to be satisfied, but is it really a motivating factor? Interpersonal relations, working conditions, he argued. Salary is going to appear under both hygiene and motivation, depending on the job. And he also thought status and security were also hygiene factors. When we pop over to the motivation side, he said, like McClellan, achievement recognition is really important. That will motivate people. The work itself, how the work is designed, what you're asking people to do. Giving employees responsibility and letting them have advancement in their career. Letting them decide how they want to grow in their own career paths is important, and giving them the opportunities for that. And salary can be very motivational, depending on the career path and the job and the context. So if we take those hygiene and motivation factors and kind of summarize, what he was basically telling us that if you don't have any of the factors, you're going to have dissatisfied and unmotivated employees. If you only have those hygiene factors, you're going to have very satisfied employees, but they're certainly not going to be motivated. And if you throw in the motivation factors along with the hygiene factors, now you're going to have satisfied and motivated employees. All right, the next theory we're going to talk about is John Adams developed a process theory, and this was back in 1963. Again, I think by now you're getting the idea that a lot of this work on motivation was definitely in the 60s. There's been some new theories come along, but most of what we still work with was actually developed then. A very important time. And what we're going to start out with John's theory, he called it the equity theory, is saying that inequity is when a person perceives their reward to effort ratio, so how much I'm being paid or acknowledged versus how hard I'm working, is different than others. Now it could be better or it could be worse. Let me give you an example. This is where employees are going to do social comparisons. They're going to look around in the me versus you world and see that employee 1 is working hard and gets paid really well, but I'm employee 2 and I work twice as hard and I don't get paid the same amount of money. In fact, I'm paid less. So that difference in the ratio of outcome to input motivates me, employee number 2 down in the bottom, to do something. I'm either going to go to my manager and complain, or I'm going to try and work even harder to see if anybody notices, or I'm going to work less because it doesn't seem to make any difference, or I'm just going to quit and go someplace else where I feel like there's more equity in the pay structure. And what he also pointed out to us was, let's say, and we'll do it in a positive way, let's say that I'm going to give you $1 million bonus. Just out of the blue, you've earned $1 million bonus. Of course we're happy, we're very satisfied, we're very motivated to stay with this great company and do some more great projects. Until I find out that the person across the row from me, so you've been given $1 million, I've been given $1 million, but let's say we both find out that the person across the row from me in that next row of cubicles also got $1 million. They didn't work as hard, and not only did they get $1 million, they got $1 million plus an additional $400 bonus. So now that $1 million is not so motivational to you and I. And equity theory says people will constantly compare what they have received for their efforts with what other people are getting for their efforts. And the reward that you may be getting, that outcome may be really great, but it's only really great if you do that comparison with others and you feel that it is equitable. Very important theory, and I'm sure you'll be able to see that playing around all around you in terms of the workplace. And what he would point out is, if you want to reduce distress and tension for employees, you've got to restore equity. That was his big takeaway. Well, Victor Vroom in 1964 said, here's another process theory. This one is the expectancy model of motivation. And he said there's 3 moving parts to this particular theory: effort, performance, and reward. Effort has to do with the perceived effort. And what is the performance probability? The technical term for this is the expectancy. In other words, if I work hard, will I get the job done? The performance part is the perceived reward probability, and the technical term here is instrumentality. Will the performance lead to the outcomes and the rewards that were promised? And the reward part is the perceived value of the reward. Do I find the outcomes and the rewards desirable? According to him, employees would not be motivated if all 3 parts were not seen by the employee as being present. So let's put all 3 of these together and see what we've got. According to Vroom, to have a strong motivational force, we have to have high expectancy. In other words, that I'm going to work hard, I'll actually get done what I've been asked to do. The instrumentality has to be high. I actually will get the reward at the end if I deliver the goods. And the valence or the value of the reward has to be high for me as well. So for example, valence, just to be clear on that one, if you were offering me a coffee mug with some sort of logo on it versus something like an extra day vacation, the valence of the extra day vacation would be much higher to me than the coffee mug. So again, according to Vroom, you have to have all 3 of these things if you want the highest, the strongest motivational force in terms of what you're asking your employees to do. The last group of theories that I want to introduce you to are what we refer to as the justice theories. And these all combine into organizational justice. And I refer to the justice theories as hybrid theories because they're a little internal, external, and process, all wrapped up into one. The 3 basic theories that combine into organizational justice are distributive, procedural, and interactional justice. With distributive justice, employees want to know that there's a fairness of outcome. In other words, I got the pay I deserved. Procedural justice is about the fairness of the process that was used to determine the outcome. I had input into the process used to give raises, and I was given a good explanation of why I received the raise I did. That seems fair to me. Interactional justice is the perceived degree to which one is treated with dignity and respect. When telling me about my raise, my supervisor was very nice and complimentary. And organizational justice is, I think this is a fair place to work. There were many people that have worked on the justice theories. I haven't listed all their names here, but certainly it makes sense that if there is a fair place to work, that I'm going to be more motivated to accomplish the goals in that particular type of workplace, and I'm going to be more inspired to do the best I can. So highly motivational when employees feel like there's organizational justice. But one question you might be asking, especially for those of you who are involved with international operations of any kind, are the motivation theories culture bound? A lot of these theories were developed during a particular time period, and they were developed in the United States. So I think there's probably 3 areas we should have a quick look at, so that if you are going to apply these in a global setting, that you take into account, firstly, individualism, group versus individual ranking. So we know that in different cultures around the world, some are collectivist, the group is the most important focus, and in other countries like the United States, we're more individualistic. So when you're talking about motivations, we have to keep in mind what type of country you're dealing with. Collectivist, those employees are going to be much more interested in outcomes that can affect the group in a positive way, versus in the U.S., our salaries are all based on individual performance. Sometimes our bonuses may be team-based, but the me versus them can impact motivation. Secondly, risk aversion. In other words, risk tolerance may affect the achievement needs. So when we heard McClellan saying, yeah, there's certain needs people feel like achieving, is there a risk aversion? If there's a risk aversion, then motivated to do things, in other words, try and get achievement goals that may have risk associated with them, may not be so high. And third, long versus short-term focus. In other words, the concept of time. Some cultures are much more focused on looking forward and back, not just focusing on the here and now. So short-term motivations can be stronger in some cultures than long-term, depending on their values, and so the hierarchy of needs can vary, which Maslow very aptly gave us and got modified through several of the people we listened to today. So motivation, very important around the world, but when we're applying it into different cultures, we need to be a little bit aware of some of the variables that might be changing. And be careful. As you take these wonderful motivational tools out there and try to apply them and to try and make your workplace a more motivational workplace, remember, if you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So make sure you consider all the details when you're working with your employee situations. And we hope you've enjoyed this seminar today, so much so that you'll enjoy us for our next webinar that's going to be on national culture. We will talk about some of the commonalities and some of the differences as we manage diverse teams in the workplace. When will that be? Next week, November the 14th, right on the same website. In the meantime, if you've got any questions, you can submit them today in the chat function or email them to bschool@beekeeper.io, bschool@beekeeper.io. You can follow the answers in the Q&A post on the Beekeeper blog in the next couple of days as well. This session is going to be archived, as will all future sessions, and they'll be available to view again or share them with your peers. You will get the details via email, and you can also find it on the same Bee School page, so beekeeper.io. Please sign up for that next session. Bring your colleagues and friends, anyone you think might benefit from this continuing education series. Thanks for watching. See you next week, and get motivated.